And you're ready, Andrew?
I'm ready. Is that water?
That's water for you. Well, I'd like to welcome you to St. Anne's. We are giving you this presentation in coordination with GIFT, Gathered in Faith Together. Gathered in Faith Together is a group of about 20 faith communities in the greater Green Bay area, and we've been providing interfaith worship opportunities for about 15 years. And so this is our first venture into providing a more educational type opportunity. Community Faith Conversations is every month on the second Tuesday of the month. We will be going through March. Beginning in January, we're going to be having panel discussions rather than a single speaker doing a presentation. You have some blue question cards as Dr. O'Connor is speaking, if you would write out any questions you have, and we will collect those at the end, and he'll go through and answer as many as he can. So Dr. Andrew O'Connor is our presenter tonight. He is Assistant Professor of Theology and Religious Studies at St. Norbert College, where he teaches courses on world religions, world scriptures, Muslim-Christian dialogue, and interfaith relations in the Middle East. He holds a PhD from the University of Notre Dame, an MA from the University of Chicago, and a BA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Andrew was a Fulbright researcher in Amman, Jordan in 2017 to 18, and is also the program chair of the International Quranic Studies Association. He has conducted research or presented at conferences in Egypt, Palestine, Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, and the UK. And now here at St. Anne's, which is probably going to be his crowning achievement, right? Dr. O'Connor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marilyn, for the kind introduction. So I should preface this talk with a warning that I injured my back pretty severely yesterday. So if I ever cringe or move like a robot, this is why. I also got a call from my mom. My dad's in the ER on the way here. So if I feel like you check my phone, it's just making sure she's not texting me with updates. So I apologize about that. So it's great to be here. I'm excited. I love talking to communities and churches. It's one of the things I like the most about my job, talking with students and churches in the area. And I'm pretty new to Green Bay, so I haven't had a chance to get to know different communities around here as well. So it's nice to have a chance to do this. And I understand in this series so far, the speakers have been representatives of the other faith traditions, correct? Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry you're kind of robbed of that tonight. I'm not a practicing Muslim. I'm a Christian who studies Islam, but I will do my best to represent the tradition, from what I've learned and from the Muslims that I know. So you're getting you can go to the next slide if you'd like as well. My little introduction to what I want my students to take away about Islam from my classes. So the key 4 points I want them to remember when they leave the class, which I've now tried to condense into a 40-minute presentation. So bear with me. And my modest goals are just this. One, to complicate your view of Islam. Just this view of Islam is that's more complex and diverse than we usually hear in the media, what we see in the news and around the world. Just to really represent as a very contradictory, paradoxical tradition that isn't always fit the molds we want it to fit in our minds. I'll give you a very bare bones summary of the life of Muhammad because it's very fundamental for how Muslims understand Islam. Number 3, a very brief introduction to the Quran. The Quran is my baby, so my main research is on the Quran as a text. I think it's a fascinating text. It's one big puzzle box full of mysteries. It's very arcane Arabic, so I think it's a ton of fun. So I'll give you a brief introduction there, and then finally end with Sharia, kind of this boogeyman word that we hear a lot in America, the Sharia, Islamic law. Sort of a rapid fire introduction of what Sharia actually is, because we hear this word a lot. So those are my 4 modest goals here. You can go to the next slide. So when it comes to Islam, I usually ask students first of class, how do you define Islam? What is Islam? What does it mean? You can go into things like, the Arabic definition is from the root meaning to peace, and it really kind of means like to bring one to peace or submission, like submitting to the will of God is what Islam means. And you can see how the word Islam has the S, L, and the M in there, and the word Muslim also has an S, L, M, because Muslim literally means the one who Islams, the one who is doing the submission to God. The next slide too. But you just get this one actually. That's the fancy Arabic definition. This is what you usually get from students, right? Something like, it's an Abrahamic monotheistic religion. Abrahamic being the term usually used for Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Monotheistic traditions that trace their origins back to this figure named Abraham. You could say it starts in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century and has 1.9 billion followers in the world today, which is about a quarter of the world population. So a quarter of the population of the world are self-described Muslims. It's the second largest religion in the world after Christianity, but it is also the fastest growing. So Christianity is sort of, disappearing more so in America and Europe, but exploding in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So if you put all the Christians in the world in a hat, picked them out at random, you're lucky not to get a Caucasian person. You're likely to get a African or Asian woman. That's just heartland of Christianity today. But Islam is the growth that's still outpacing Christianity. So in a few decades, Islam will probably be the largest religion in the world, and will surpass Christianity. So you can have a kind of a very simple, bare bones definition like that it's a monotheistic religion from Arabia, practiced all over the world. But it's also a religion that's very complex, and it finds lots of unique expressions all over the world. You can go to the next slide. And then I usually ask my students, okay, what are the core beliefs of Islam? And this is usually an ask for audience participation. So does anyone know, like, top of your head, what you know about Islam? What's a belief of the Muslims hold? Sorry?
I didn't understand. What did you say?
Oh, do you any core beliefs of Islam that you're familiar with? Yeah? Muhammad is the messenger of God. Yes, and this is actually part of a creed. Has anyone ever heard of the 5 pillars of Islam? Okay, so the 5 pillars, you can go to the next slide. Every high school religious studies class, if they talk about religion at all, the way they introduce Islam is through these 5 pillars. Like, Muslims practice these 5 pillars. And if you do these 5 things, then you're a good Muslim. The first is it's called the Shahada, the profession of faith. So it's saying 2 things. 1, there's no God but God, and 2, Muhammad is the messenger of God. So it's just sort of and the foundational creed. And in Islamic tradition, once you've said that and meant it, you're a Muslim. You have to go through confirmation class. There's no baptism. There's no rites. If you say there's no God but God, Muhammad's the messenger of God, and you mean it, you're a Muslim. Right? That's the first pillar. This is core belief. It has really cool alliteration in Arabic as well. La ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah. So it's pretty. Salat is prayer. Anyone know how often a Muslim prays throughout the day? 5. Good. 5 times a day. When I was in Cairo, I had 3 roommates for a summer. One was Buddhist, so it's myself, a Buddhist, and then 2 Muslims. And the 2 Muslims wake up at 4 a.m. to pray. So, okay, you guys get 1 room. Buddhists don't have the other room, so we can sleep in. So it's like before the sunrise, noon, and then it's 2 at night. So 5 times a day. Next is zakat, almsgiving. So donating so much of your funds to the mosque, to charity, to different charitable causes. Then there is Saum Ramadan, which is fasting in the month of Ramadan. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this tradition. But the entire month of Ramadan, Muslims will abstain from food, liquids, drinking anything, sex, smoking. I think that those are the big 4. So from sunrise to sunset, no drinking, no eating, nothing. Which I tried in Jordan, but but I'm Irish, so I just sweat all day. The hardest thing for me is the no drinking. Like I need water all day. And my experience also, as soon as it hits sunset, when I was on a bus in Cairo once, the first thing everyone does is has a cigarette. Like, oh, good, thank God, not a good smoke. Or like if you want to be really pious, you'd have a date. Apparently Muhammad would like dates, since you really tasty fruit. The first thing you'd have is a date. And then you'd have a huge meal with your family to celebrate the end of the fast. And it's also interesting too, because if you're in the Middle East, when the fast is going on, they basically shift the schedule of the day. So it would be like midnight, you hear children playing in the streets, because they just sleep all morning. If you can't eat, you just have the children sleep, and then you make the nighttime your playtime. So it's fasting the entire month of Ramadan, sunrise, sunset. And then there is the Hajj, or the pilgrimage to Mecca. So every able-bodied Muslim, if they had means, should at one point in their life go on a Hajj to the city of Mecca. I'll say why that's important in a moment. So these are sort of the bare bones 5 that any given class textbook says, this is what Islam is. You do these 5 things, you're a Muslim. The interesting thing about this to me is that these ideas are not found in the Quran at all. The Quran mentions prayer, only says prayer 3 times a day, it never mentions 5 times a day. It sort of alludes to almsgiving and fasting, so it has these ideas. But this whole concept of a 5-pillared belief system is not an Quranic idea. And it seems, I hear Westerners talk about these more than actual Muslims. Muslims will do these things. They don't conceptualize it as like this 5-pillared structure. It seems to be something that the West likes to talk about more so than Muslims themselves. It is found in texts known as the Hadith, which we'll talk about in a moment. So this is all to say that this bare bones structure that we talk about in the West is not something that Muslims really think about in these terms. And for them, Islam is much more than just follow these 5 things, then boom, there you go. All right, go to the next slide. Because Islam is also about lots of other things. Anyone want to guess who these are? Sorry? He's missing over here. Here he is. This is little baby Jesus with Mary. Shortly after the Nativity, which the Quran, I'll show you the Quran talks about the birth of Jesus. And here is Jesus on a donkey riding into Jerusalem. So Jesus is a very big deal in Islam. Jesus is a model of piety and faith. And so you don't hear him much when he talks about Islamic belief, but he's in the Quran, Muhammad is mentioned 4 times. Jesus is mentioned 19 or 30 times, somewhere in there. But way more often, when it comes to prophets, the Quran talks the most about Moses, then Abraham, then Jesus. Those are the 3 most important figures. So Islam also cares a lot about Mary and Jesus. Mary is the only woman mentioned by name in the entire Quran. Right? That's interesting. And this is just, so John the Baptist is also in the Quran. I have pretty small ear, but that's John the Baptist. John the Baptist baptizing Jesus in the Jordan River. So all this goes to say, like, when there was this big incident, I don't know if anyone remembers this, maybe 5-6 years ago, in which a author by the name of Reza Aslan wrote a book about Jesus. So he's a Muslim who wrote a book about Jesus. And this caused huge controversy because people were like, why are you talking about Jesus? Like, he belongs to us. He's the Christian guy. You get Muhammad and everybody else. You don't get Jesus. Which kind of is interesting debate because, you argue like, who owns Jesus? Nobody owns Jesus, right? But what goes in the circle of what is Islam and what does not go in the circle? Who gets to decide what belongs in Islam, what doesn't belong in Islam? And what does beliefs, or what does one have to do in order to be considered a Muslim? And this is continuously debated by Muslims themselves and, academic scholars of religion too. So when you hear things about Islam, you have to think, okay, which Islam? Like, whose version of Islam are we talking about here? Catholics and Protestants don't agree on everything. Same with Muslims all over the world as well. You can go to the next slide too. So I'd like to here's my little sneak peek of how complex Islam can be. And it reminds me of this quote from Walt Whitman. Do I contradict myself? Very well. Did I contradict myself? I am large, I contain multitudes. And Islam contains multitudes. It's a very long historical tradition for 1,500 years with a lot of diversity and paradoxes too. And here's an example of contradictions. You know the next slide here. This is from a book called The Divan, which is it's written in Persian by a fellow named Hafiz, who died 1309. This is the single bestseller in the Islamic world outside of the Quran. This is, especially in Iran and Persia, this is like the national book of literature. Everyone reads Hafiz. Everyone loves Hafiz. It seems like the model of the Persian literature, Persian language, kind of like Shakespeare, I guess, would be for older English. So everybody reads this in school. No matter how religious or not religious you are, you're going to be reading Hafiz in school in Iran. But the thing about Hafiz is you would think that an Islamic literature would be, pious and full of talk about Muhammad and praise Muhammad. It's kind of scandalous at times. It's kind of a fun text, and it kind of pushes the boundary of what's, what we think of would be acceptable Islamic practice. So here is a poem about wine. O cupbearer, set my glass afire with the light of wine. O minstrel, sing, the world fulfilleth my heart's desire. I see the glow of my love's red cheek, and scant of wit, ye who fail to seek the pleasures that wine alone can bring. That's interesting. It's about wine. Well, in Islam, wine is haram, it's forbidden. The Quran forbids any Muslim from drinking wine or alcohol. And it's text that everyone reads and loves, praising wine. And then it gets even more scandalous. You can go to the next one too. We'll skip over this one. Here we go. Hast thou forgotten when a sojourner within the tavern gates and drunk with wine, I found love's passionate wisdom hidden there, which in the mosque none even now divine. He's saying, hey, I found this wisdom, I found the divine in a tavern with wine, which you can't even find in a mosque. Like, he's like undermining, Islamic beliefs, right? And this is praised in Iran. So even this place that we tend to picture as being all, I don't know how you describe Iran. In American mentality, it's very, ruled by religious theocracy, but they're still reading things that are subverting things that undermine Islamic belief. They allow, there's room to be scandalous a little bit there. I go to the next one. And this is my other favorite example of different expressions of Islam. This is a poem written by Rabia of Basra, who is in the Middle Ages, she was an Iraqi Muslim mystic who wrote love poems about God. And I used to joke to students that she's my favorite Muslim, but she wrote these little poems in Arabic that I have students read them, and students would say, oh, this sounds very Christian. Like in their heads, if it's talking about obedience, submit to God, do X, Y, Z, that's Islamic. When you're talking about love and the beauty of God, that's Christian. Well, you can find the exact same thing in Islam as well. You can talk about passion for God, how God is characterized by love for humanity. The same thing is found. There's a great story about Rabia in which she's running around the city of Baghdad with a bucket of water and a torch. And someone said, what are you doing? You're crazy. And she's like, no, the water is to put out the fires of hell, and the torch is to set heaven on fire. Because if I only love God for the sake of going to heaven or escaping hell, they don't actually love God. This is kind of a beautiful little thing about her. Another fun fact about her, you can go to the next slide here. If you ever go to Jerusalem, which you should, you can go to the chapel of the Ascension, where supposedly Jesus ascended into heaven, found in the book of Acts. Well, in the same grounds as this chapel, Rabia has been buried. So she's been buried. The Sufi female Muslim saint has been buried in the grounds of the chapel of Ascension to show that she had the same love of God that Jesus had. Is the idea there. All right, you can go to the next one. All right, and then the next thing I wanted to show here is Islam global perspective. So when you think about Islam, or think about Muslims, what comes into your mind, what image comes into your head? I think this is what most Americans think of, is Saudi Arabians, oil money, Arabs with the big habayas and women wearing burqas. Well, this is not actually the case with most Muslims in the world. See you on the next slide. What do we think of this? Do you think of ISIL, Al-Qaeda, anything of that sort? You know, the next one. Well, if you look at a population map of Muslims all over the world, or based on population pie chart of some sort, you'll find that most Muslims in the world are not even Arabs. They don't even speak Arabic. They are Southeast Asian. So you can see Pakistan, India, and the most populous Muslim country in the world, it's not an Arab country, like Saudi Arabia, it's Indonesia. So most Muslims in the world are Indonesian. You know, the next slide here. And so most Muslims in the world live in, number one, Indonesia, Bangladesh. I think most Americans don't even know Bangladesh is on a map. Right? Pakistan, Nigeria, Iran, Turkey, Egypt. So you don't even get to an Arab country until number 7. So more Muslims speak Indonesian, Bengali, Urdu, or Turkish than they actually do Arabic. Even though when we think of Muslims, we think of Arabs, we think of Arabic. But that's the minority of Muslims around the world. The next one. And you can go through these pretty rapid fire. So when you think of Muslims, you should be thinking of this. It's Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Iran, Turkey. Anyone know who this is? And now we get to Egypt. My students all know who this is, but this is Mohamed Salah. He's one of the top soccer players in the world right now. He plays for Liverpool in the UK. But yes, if you go to the next slide, he's Muslim, right? People forget about like these top athletes in the world could be Muslim too. This is his wife wearing a hijab. Great. So you know the next one. Or even Caucasians, right? I've met a lot of converts over my studies of people from Christian backgrounds who converted to Islam for various reasons. So the convert community in America is rising as well. Oh, and then this is, so we think of Muslim leaders, we always think of like Arabia or organizations like ISIL. This is the Aga Khan. It's actually his birthday today, fun fact. He is the imam for a certain group of Shiite Muslims. He's sort of like, it's a bad analogy, but he's the Shiite Pope. But no one ever thinks about him, like even though he's like, when it comes to Christianity, like usually the face, whether Catholic or not, people think of who's the face of Christianity, usually the Pope or some figure like that. No one ever thinks about him, even like all he does is do fundraisers. He speaks all over the world. He does a lot for charity. There he's with the Queen. He mostly resides in the UK. But people don't think about him. They think about these Arabia and the Gulf countries more than really sort of, even though he's like the most intellectual figure in Islam today. All right, so next slide. All right, and this is just a quote I like to share with students, just to show you how diverse Islam has always been. This is from a 10th century text. After their prophet, the people disagreed about many things. Some of them led others astray, while some dissociated themselves from others. Thus, they became distinct groups and disparate parties, except that Islam gathers them all together and encompasses them all. So Islam itself has always encompassed disagreements and diversity. You know, the next one. This is the chart. I won't get into it now, but if you want to get into the Sunni Shia stuff gets crazy complex, which I can talk about if you want. But it's kind of like if you make a chart of Protestantism and other denominations of Christianity just branches out like crazy. It's the same way in Islam. All right, next one. And so again, what goes in there? Is it just Arabs? Is it just things like ISIL? Or does it also include, you know, Bengali women who are teaching students how to read? That's also Islamic. Great. Next one. Okay. That's my little overview of how complex and diverse Islam can be. And so let's jump all the way back to Arabia now in the 7th century. And this is the very rapid overview of Muhammad's life, because for Muslims, the whole story of where Islam came to be is centered around this figure, Muhammad. And Muslims children learn about his life all through school. So Muhammad, his the Arabian Peninsula, which today is made up of the Saudi Arabia, because the Saud family rules it, was not called Saudi back then. It was just Arabia. And it was not unified as a single political state. It had a bunch of Arab tribes all over the place who who sort of raid each other and kind of vie for control. And there are two superpowers at this time, if you go to the year 570. One superpower was the Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, and they were Christians. They were Greek Orthodox Christians who ruled what is modern-day Turkey, most of the modern-day Holy Land, and Egypt. And their arch enemies were, to the east, the Persians, the Sasanian Persians to be exact. And these two, for centuries, were basically locked in a massive Cold War, back and forth. They would conquer land from each other. They would hire Arab tribes to attack each other, like a sort of proxy war. And by the time Muhammad's born, basically this whole area is exhausted. There's been so much warfare. This population has been decreasing through all the fighting. And there's also an idea at this time period that when you conquered an area, you converted everyone you conquered. So when the Byzantine Christians conquered somebody, they'd say, okay, now you're all Christians now. When the Persians conquered somebody, they'd say, okay, now you're all Zoroastrians, which is a religion that's very, very small today. It's a very dualistic religion. So when people say Islam is a religion of the sword, to be fair, all religions in this time period were religions of the sword. It was just the way, like, people, it's scary to us now, it's kind of horrifying, but that was just like the culture. When your empire had a religion, when you spread your religion too. And that was just the way things were. And so when Islam came into being, this was sort of the mindset. When you spread, people join religion too. And actually, in fact, the Arabs were less forceful about conversion than the Byzantine Christians were, or the Zoroastrian Persians. Arabs seem to think that Islam was only for Arabs. So you keep your religion. If you're Arab, you can be a Muslim. If not, stay a Christian. But over time, that changed, and people want to become Muslims too. But anyways, so there's massive Cold War going on, and Muhammad is born down here in Mecca, which was kind of an unknown little town back then. But the important thing that he's born to the ruling tribe of the area called the Quraysh. The next slide. And this is kind of an older image of Mecca, I think in the 1700s, could be wrong, which now looks like this today. It's huge. The Saudi families poured billions of dollars into like hotels for the Hajj and accommodating just the millions and millions of people who come every year. But you can still see in the center up there, that little black cube, the little black box. The next slide. And this is the center of the city of Mecca at that time, was the worship of something called the Kaaba, which is just Arabic for the cube. When I lived in Jordan, our TV had one channel, and that was the Kaaba. So 24/7, you just watch people walking around it all day. And tradition goes that this shrine, this cube, was built by Abraham, but not his second son Isaac, from whom the Israelites came from his first son Ishmael. So if you know the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael into the wilderness, but God says, I'll take care of them, and God assures Hagar, I'll take care of her and her son. Ishmael actually means Yishmael, God hears. So God hears Hagar's cries and to take care of them. And tradition goes that it's from Ishmael the Arabs descended, and that Ishmael and Abraham together, when Abraham went to go visit his son, I guess, built the shrine to God in Mecca. But over time, sort of the Arabs' story goes, forgot about this original purpose. It was meant for one God, and turned it into a shrine to many gods, a polytheistic shrine full of idols. And so in Muhammad's day, Arabs would come from all over Arabian Peninsula to pay homage to all these idols in the shrine. And today, when Muslims pray toward Mecca 5 times a day, they're actually praying toward the Kaaba. So no matter where you are in Mecca in respect to the Kaaba, that's where you're praying. It's not just to the city itself, it's to this point here. All right, so in Muhammad's day, this is a polytheistic shrine. Next slide. And when Muhammad is 40 years old, in Islamic tradition, you're fully an adult when you're 40. So Muhammad's fully mature when he turns 40 years old. He is known to be a respectful individual who likes to go on this mountain here, Mount Hira, to meditate and pray. And as a one such visit, when he's 40 years old, he starts to shake, and somebody grabs him and says, read, Iqra, Iqra. And Muhammad says, I don't know how to read. What do I read? And it turns out to be the angel Gabriel, keeps shaking him. And then suddenly Muhammad is inspired with the first verse of the Quran. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Recite in the name of your Lord who created you. And then Muhammad basically begins to receive a series of revelations. He thinks he's going crazy. He thinks he's possessed by a demon. He goes to his wife, Khadija, explains, and she says, oh, no, you're not possessed. I think you're a prophet. Let's go talk to my cousin Waraka, who's a Christian. He'll confirm. So supposedly the story goes, a Christian confirms to Muhammad that he's a prophet and that he spends his years preaching in Mecca. On the next slide. And really in this early period, there's sort of four main themes to what Muhammad is preaching. One, he's the messenger of God. I'm a prophet. Two, there is only one God, and God is wholly other. God is unlike any other thing, so you cannot compare God to anything, including human beings. So this is the idea of like, don't call Jesus God, don't call God Jesus. Don't associate anything with God because God's wholly unlike any other thing. The idea that God will judge humanity and the end is nigh. So the early parts of the Quran very much emphasize that, like, repent now because it's going to be too late soon. And then the Quran is very big on the importance of piety and averting hellfire. So if you're familiar with the Bible, Bible's kind of vague when it comes to heaven and hell. Like, hell is dark, but it's fire and it's sad. The Quran loves to describe hell and heaven and what actually tangibly is like. The actual features of what you experience there. Because the idea here is that, like, it's trying to scare you and encourage you to do good. So it's like, if you don't want trees with demon heads spitting acid at you, don't go to hell. That's one of the things the Quran says. So very, very simplistic preaching. No, that's good. You can go. But when Muhammad's preaching these things, the rest of the Arab tribes don't like this because he's undermining basically their well-being. Because the city thrives on other Arabs coming to the city, visiting the shrine, and spending money. And so his own tribe turns against him because he's undermining the shrine. He's forced to flee to a city called Yathrib, which becomes a city of, which we know called today Medina. Medina is just the Arabic word for city. It's the city of the Prophet, Medina to Nabi. And here Muhammad's life changes. He goes from, the next slide, I think. Yeah, it's not a super far distance, but he goes from sort of a street preacher who's being persecuted. So in Mecca, Muhammad's always persecuted. He's preaching against the other polytheistic Arabs. In Medina, he becomes the ruler of a polity. He gets other Arab tribes to join him. He becomes more of a political leader and a general. And here he begins God gives him permission to fight back against the polytheists who are trying to kill him. And so this is where we get the part of Muhammad's life where he's actually engaging in battles against the polytheists. The next slide. And a series of battles back and forth, which are really interesting, but I won't get into it here. And it ends with Muhammad marching on Mecca, but the city gives up before he gets there. Without much bloodshed, they surrender the city to Muhammad. And he goes to the Kaaba, takes out all of the idols of the Kaaba and breaks them. To restore it to the one God. But as they're clearing the Kaaba of idols, he says, wait, there's one idol we cannot break, and that's a picture of Jesus, or picture of Mary holding baby Jesus. They said, we can't break this one's important. So they save that and they break everything else. And then Muhammad lives about another 2 years. And after his death, you can go to the next slide, basically his followers explode across the Middle East. This is the Arab conquests shocked Christians and Jews who witnessed it. They had no idea who these Arabs were, where they're coming from. Arabs were seen as like barbarians who live in the desert, and yet here they were conquering everybody. They took the entire Arabian Peninsula. They took all of what we know as like the Middle East today away from the Byzantines, and they totally destroyed the Persian Empire. So the Byzantines lived for another few centuries and ruled the area, but the Persian Empire fell and it became Islamic. And partly the reason was the Arabs were so successful was the two other empires were exhausted from their warfare. And number two, Arabs had camels, which you don't need roads for camels. You just kind of go super fast. And if you have city folk who like aren't used to fighting and have nice, comfortable lives, versus people who grew up in the wilderness as Bedouins, the Arabs are pretty tough when it came to conflict. So in a crazy amount of time, Islam spreads up into North Africa, up into Spain. People often forget that Spain was Islamic for centuries. And then all the way east down into the Indus River Valley in India, eventually into China as well. So Islam spread quite rapidly. But and again, initially, Arabs did not try to convert anybody. They said, Christians, you live in this town here, pay us taxes, and we'll leave you alone. But over time, people realized, hey, if I convert, I don't have to pay taxes. And so other non-Arabs wanted to convert eventually as well. But that's sort of my Islamic origins story there. How are we doing with time? 7:06. So one more thing I really want to get into is the Quran. Leaving on the next slide. Because the Quran is my favorite thing about Islam. It's a lot of fun to read and study. But I'd like to begin that with a little pop quiz, which is this. Jesus is to Christians as blank is to Muslims, and the Bible is to Christians as blank is to Muslims. Top one's the Quran? Muhammad? Quran. Okay. Perfect. All right, next slide. So this is the reverse. This is totally counterintuitive to what you would think. I'll try and explain what I mean here in a moment. But so Jesus, this is my trap, so I'm sorry. Jesus is to Christians as the Quran is to Muslims, and the Bible is to Christians as Muhammad is to Muslims. So person, book, person. And this is why I would say that. See you on the next slide. So for Christians will use the phrase like word of God to refer to the Bible, but like really the word of God, from Gospel of John is Jesus. Like this is God incarnate, right? Christmas is about Jesus or God being born as a human being in human history, God becoming incarnate in the flesh, like in Spanish word for meat is carne, in flesh, incarnate. But for Muslims, God never entered human history as a person. God's word, God's eternal word, which existed since before time, enters into human history as a book. So in Libret, this I met a little neologism, like God's words that are eternal exist in a book, not a person. If you want to know what God is like, you look to Jesus for Christians. If you know what God is like for Muslims, you look to the Quran. This is the eternal preservation of God in human history. You go to the next slide. Because this is particularly for Sunni Muslims, which is the majority of Muslims, the author of the Quran is not Muhammad. It's God. These are God's exact words. Muhammad was simply the passive vehicle through which God would reveal things to angel Gabriel, who then would aspire to Muhammad. Muhammad would recite in Arabic what he received as a revelation. So he's very passive in the whole role. It's God's words in Arabic. A Saudi friend once told me that when I die and go to heaven, I will hear God speaking in Arabic, because Arabic is God's language. And I usually do show and tell here now, but if there are Bibles in these aisles. If you pick up the Bible, what language is it in? It's English. Like nobody goes and reads Hebrew and Greek to read the Bible, which you should. Hebrew is an awesome language. Greek I hate, but Hebrew is awesome. But very few Christians actually take the time to learn Greek and Hebrew to read the Bible. But we still call it the Bible. We don't say this is a translated Bible, but we do. But it's still the same, because what's important is the message, right? The general idea of what it's trying to say, not the actual Hebrew Greek words. That's not the way it is for the Quran. For the Quran, it is not the Quran unless it is in Arabic, because then it's God's word. Once you translate it, it's a human interpretation of God's word. So my show and tell example is usually like most copies of the Quran in English say like the Quran interpretation, or translation of the Quran, because for Muslims it's no longer actually the Quran. It's like something else, because it's God's word. This is just my little me being nitpicky on how to say it. With the K, it's very old school English, so usually it's a Q, U-R-A-N. Also, it's not Quran, which is like the text and thing. It's Quran. But this is just say however you want, spell however you want, but usually with the Quran is the most accurate way. Arabic has a letter that's our English K, just a k. There's also one with the back of your tongue hitting the top of your mouth, and that's what the Quran has. So it's usually represented with a K, Quran. Anyways, a little segue there. Next one. So it's written in classical Arabic, and almost every Muslim learns to read the Quran in Arabic. Even if you don't know a lick of what it's saying, you're going to read it in Arabic because that's what God's words are. There's a lot of fun things about how there's some loan words from Aramaic or Syriac. Has anyone here ever heard of Aramaic or Syriac? Jesus spoke Aramaic, right? My tattoo was in Aramaic. It seems to be that a lot of the vocabulary in the Quran is from Aramaic, so it suggests that Muhammad learned about Christianity from Aramaic-speaking Christians or something like that, which is fun. So in grad school, I was part of a thing called the Quran Circle, where me, my advisor, and some other students, every Friday afternoon would sit in a circle, and we take turns reading a verse of the Quran and translating. So you'd read it to practice your pronunciation, then translate it. And I was pretty good at translating. My pronunciation was meh. But then we got to my friend Lily, who's from Indonesia, and you'd ask her to read it, and it would just be flawless, beautiful, poetic, rhythmic Arabic. You'd say, okay, what does that mean? No idea. Because she learned it her entire life how to read it and like poetically recite Arabic beautifully, but she never actually learned how to read any of it. Like students are scandalized by this, and my example for an analogy is, so my dad grew up pre-Vatican II Catholic. So he'd go to Mass, and what does he hear? He hears Latin. Does he know what the priest is saying? No, he has no idea. He can repeat it, he can say it over and over, he had it memorized for years. But it's this idea that the sacred language itself is more important than actually understanding what is being said. Most Muslims do have some translation by their bedside or whatever to compare or consult what they're actually reading. But when you're actually going to read the Quran, it's going to be in Arabic. All right, the next one. I'll skip over this for now, but I have a video here it's on YouTube. You can just Google on YouTube, like Quran reciters. And it's a girl who's about 12 years old, who's Turkish, reciting the entire Quran from memory. She never actually looked at the book. She's just looking up and she recites it. And it's beautiful. And this is like, I don't think I memorized a single verse of the Bible until I was in college or something. And it's in English, but there are Muslims all over the world who have memorized the entire Quran by the time they're like 8 or 9 years old in Arabic. Even if they don't understand what they're saying, they don't actually speak Arabic, but they can memorize the Quran in Arabic. And there's competitions all over the world. Egypt hosts a big annual competition where there's actually a documentary about this, which is fascinating. Children who are like under 10 in a competition to recite the Quran, see who does it the best. These become like bestsellers. You can buy their CDs and listen to it. The Quran is 2/3 the length of the New Testament, so it's a little shorter than the New Testament, but still pretty long. The next one. And the whole Quran rhymes, which really suggests that it was meant for an oral presentation. Even the word Quran means the recitation, the thing to be recited. So here's my example here. وَالْقُرْآنُ حَكِيمٌ إِنَّا مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمٌ تَنزِيلَ عَزِيزٍ رَحِيمٍ. So the sort of eem and een sounds are very, very common. Again, which it suggests the Quran was not meant to be a private devotional text as much as it was meant to be something for homiletic use or recited to a crowd. Here, next one. And the idea with the Quran, in most Islamic theology, is that it's the newest and final scripture in a long history of scriptures, all of which represent this divine scripture that's with God in paradise. So God sent to Moses the Torah, or the Torah in Arabic, for the Israelites. But over time, people forgot what he was teaching, or it got corrupted. So God sent the Psalms to David, and then to Jesus the Gospel, the Injil, which is also fascinating too because there are 4 Gospels in the New Testament, but the Quran only ever says that there's one, and it says Jesus is the author, even though Jesus never actually wrote anything according to the Gospels. He just, these are stories about Jesus, not things that he wrote or revealed. Whereas for the Quran, sort of reimagines all scriptures in its own image, and that all scriptures are meant to be the same, and they're all God's words that the prophet recites to their audience. Fascinating thing is that the Quran, even though it talks about it being a prophet, it's very apocalyptic, it doesn't mention the biblical prophets as much. It doesn't mention Isaiah, Jeremiah, those sorts of figures who have a lot of close parallels with the Quran in terms of message. But what are you going to mention? All right, so that's the Quran. I'm trying to think if maybe we should skip over the Hadith. Go back one slide. So I'll just one last point here. So the Quran is the holiest book for Muslims, right? You can find like a holy, this is the idea, I think my mother-in-law, who was a good Protestant, who's like, her Bible's falling apart. It's full of like highlighters in there, page, like she's written all over the margins. Because that shows like her piety, right? That she's reading in her Bible all the time. For the Quran, you're not supposed to, it's this hard copy itself is holy. So you can actually buy like little chairs to put it on. You're not supposed to write in the margin or anything. Mine has coffee stains on it. It's kind of an oops, but like the physical Quran itself is holy. These are God's eternal words in the original language. But the Quran itself is, again, it's not very long. It's only two-thirds the length of the New Testament. So for a lot of Islamic theology or Muslim belief, you have to turn to something called the Hadith. And the Hadith are not as holy as the Quran, but they're probably just as important when it comes to Muslims' beliefs and practices. What the Hadith are, they're reports of the words, actions, or silent approval of what the Prophet Muhammad said or did. So they were passed on to people who knew him supposedly, and usually it's a big game of telephone. I heard from so-and-so, heard from so-and-so, heard from so-and-so that Mary Lynn said that she likes chocolate. So boom, then that would become recorded in history. And that literally is, you can find hadiths of Muhammad liking candy and sweets. Like, because the idea is that he's holy, he's a prophet, right? We have to know everything we can about him. You know, you can find hadith about how he grew his beard long, shaved his mustache. So that's why really pious Muslims will have a shaved mustache, but like growing a big beard, because they want to look like Muhammad. It's always reports to kind of like how can we live holy lives by modeling our lives on Muhammad is the idea here. Silent approval, meaning that, you know, someone would say, I did this in front of Muhammad, and he'd not say anything, which means that he was cool with it. He's not going to object. So, you know, the next one. You can skip over here. So I just have a couple examples of hadith, and then I can open up to questions. But so they give a lot of like very practical moral guidance in the hadith. Abdullah ibn Amr heard, like you heard, this is the guy who we're hearing this from. A man asked the Prophet, what sort of deeds or what qualities of Islam are good? The Prophet said, to feed the poor and greet those whom you know and those whom you do not know. Right? So this is very practical, like this is a good way to live out Islam there. Next one. But the other thing that hadith are extremely important for is explaining things when the Quran is silent. So again, the Quran's pretty short. It doesn't talk about everything you need to know to live a holy life. And the hadith fill the gaps. So here's the example I give college. This is for college students, right? So what example I use is alcohol. So what do you do when the Quran is silent? The Quran forbids wine. Khamr is the word in Arabic. But what about beer? What about hard alcohol? Are those forbidden too? So go to the next slide. So what happens is the hadith fill this gap. It was narrated us by Suwaid from so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. The messenger of God, Muhammad sent me to Yemen, and I said, oh, messenger of God, there are different kinds of drinks there. What should I drink, and what should I refrain from? He said, what are they? And I said, mead and beer. He said, what are mead and beer? Muhammad's never been to Wisconsin to drink beer. I said, mead is a drink made from honey, and beer is made from grains. The messenger of God said, all intoxicants are unlawful. So boom, that's where we get the explanation. It's taking what the Quran says and expanding it to make it more relevant to cover everything else you might find in life. Then you go to the next one. And so this, when it comes to Sharia, Islamic law, which is a scary term, the idea here is this. Why follow human law? Because humans are fallible. We have really bad ideas sometimes. When you could follow God's law. If God said, here's the way to live, why would you follow any other way that humans devised? And it's very much modeled on the 10 Commandments, if you know the 10 Commandments well. Early on, you had these rules about how to behave toward God, not using God's name in vain, having no other God. Then you get the things about human beings, right? Honor your mother and father, do not murder, etc. And the same with Sharia. You have things about how to relate to God, things how to relate to other people as well. And you can jump to the next one here. You have to remember this fancy vocab terms by any means. But the point I'll make about Sharia is that there is no single one Sharia. It's continuously debated and argued about endlessly. You can jump up more slide, actually. There's Sharia, God's divine law, and then there's the human attempt to apply and understand the Sharia. And then really, Muslim jurists do not agree on this. So when people are afraid about Sharia coming into America, the question is, what Sharia? Whose interpretation of Sharia? Because it's always debated. There's never, you can't go buy one textbook that says this is Islamic law. It's going to be this school of Islamic law versus that school versus this school. And especially in the modern age, in the olden days, if you wanted to learn, if you had a question like, can I hold my girlfriend's hand in public? You go to the local imam at the mosque and say, hey, can I do this? And they said, no. Okay, that's your answer. But in today's age, what do you do if your mom says no? You go online, find a new Islamic law, email this it's called a mufti, an Islamic law expert. Can I hold my girlfriend's hand? Yes. Oh, boom, there we go. So Islamic law today is getting more and more diverse because you have more and more authorities, and it's not centralized anymore. So it's this fascinating thing. You can Google search like modern fatwas about like playing video games, about dating, about movies, and this is also Sharia. Sharia isn't just, I don't know, cutting off people's hands if they're thieves. That's medieval. It's about how do you live a pious life now with technology. Actually, my favorite debate in Islamic law, you can go to the next slide, one more, is about this. This is a fascinating debate because I don't know about you, but I love coffee. I can't live without coffee. I have no degrees without coffee. But coffee came from the Islamic world. It came from Ethiopia up into Arabia and then through the rest of the world. So even the word coffee comes from the Arabic word qahwa. But when these Muslim jurists discovered coffee, they didn't know what to do with it. Is this alcohol? Is it an intoxicant? Does it affect the body the same way alcohol does? Is it legal? Is it illegal? What do we do? And this was a debate for like 200 years about what to do about coffee. And they basically realized that even though jurists tried to forbid coffee, people drank it anyways. So like they gave up. So okay, coffee's fine. You can drink it. So Islamic law allows for flexibility and debate and disagreements. It's a complex thing. If anyone's ever had Turkish coffee, it's amazing. Like I drink coffee like crazy, but even one little cup of that, I'm bouncing off the walls. It's really delicious. But I think that's the last thing I had. Is that right? Yes. So Sharia, it's debated, very complex thing. You're never going to find one interpretation of what Sharia is supposed to be.
What do the mainstream Muslims think of the radicals? I mean, we don't hear much conflict with them.
So there is a pretty, thank you. So the question was, what do mainstream Muslims think of radicals? And in my experience when I lived in Jordan is they talk about it a lot. They're very much concerned about reforming the image of Islam, especially when they think about America or Europe. And it's actually, so I was there when ISIL was still a big thing in 2017, 2018 in Jordan. And actually, so ISIL or ISIS is an acronym, right, of what they're called. In Arabic, they call them Daesh, which means those who trample underfoot. So even like the terms they use for these groups is emphasizing how much like they're oppressive, they're tyrants, and there's big education programs in the Middle East to like educate the youth not to join these groups. But I just feel like we don't really often hear about those in America. Like we don't hear like the counter arguments about ISIL. Actually, when I was in Jordan in 2012, does anyone here remember like the Sikh temple shooting in 2012 in Oak Creek, Wisconsin? I lived in Oak Creek when that happened. I lived 2 blocks away near Milwaukee. And so I lived 2 blocks away, went to Jordan for the summer, and it happened. And it was all over the news in Jordan. So I had to tell my teacher, who's Jordanian, oh, I live there. And so her perception of America was there's shooting everywhere, and she's not safe because the shooter thought the Sikhs were Muslims, were targeting them. It's like the way we view the Middle East is like scary. That's how they viewed America. It's like, oh, we're gonna get shot if we go to America because this guy's going for Muslims everywhere. And so you don't hear about it here as much, but all the discourse that I heard in Jordan was like how we combat ISIL and how we get the ideology go away and everything. And most Muslims I know here talk about it a lot too.
We hear the word jihad.
Jihad?
Okay, can you explain what it is?
Yeah, so jihad is an Arabic word that means struggle. And for the Quran itself, has 2 kinds of jihad. There's the jihad against the polytheists who are fighting Muhammad. And so this is where the radicals usually misunderstand it, is that the Quran does talk about jihad. Like it talks about violence, it talks about fighting the unbelievers. But for the Quran, it's specifically referring to the Meccans who are trying to persecute and stop Muhammad. So when it talks about jihad, it's not saying, hey, all Muslims everywhere go out and do these things. It's saying, hey, you guys, and there's some ugly stuff, I won't lie, like there's some verses of the Quran about fighting the unbelievers, which, just like stuff in the Old Testament, I'm not a big fan of it. It seems a little too violent for me. But it's contextualized there as, hey, go fight these Meccans who are fighting us and attack them. It's not meant to be a universal war against all people at all times. And that's called the lesser jihad. The greater jihad is the struggle inside of ourselves. So your struggle against your own unbelief. And so there's a line Muhammad goes, I've returned from the lesser jihad, fighting on the battlefield, to the greater jihad of fighting my own unbelief now. So jihad's the kind of thing where I'm not going to deny that it's there, that it does have violent implications at times in the Quran. But for the Quran itself, it seems to want to contextualize it in Muhammad's lifetime, in a sense. But people miss that contextualization and they want to make it universal.
The jihad of the sword.
The what?
The jihad of the sword.
Of the sword? Yeah, so that'd be the lesser jihad. So,
One of the questions there, someone online asked if we would put the link that you had. We will put that in the comments online when we're done here.
Absolutely, yeah, I can share that with you. So I can go through these cards.
Yes, go ahead and answer.
Are all imams equal, or do some have more authority? So that's a good question. So the term imam means something different for Sunnis and Shias. For Sunnis, an imam is basically like a pastor, of the local church or mosque, the mosque. So the imam leads prayer. They lead the sermon on Fridays, and their only authority is really to lead their community, their local mosque. But for Shia or Shiites, the imam is there's only one imam, and that imam is basically the Pope, because their imam is the leader of the entire global Muslim community. And it gets even more complicated too, because people debate about who is the real imam, and there's also debates about it's not just the Pope where he's like an authority figure. That there's an idea that if the imam dies, the world will be destroyed. Like he's that important. He's like the anchor of divinity in the world, but also still not a prophet. It gets debated. But so for Sunnis, imams all have the same authority. They're just the local leaders. For Shiites, the imam is the top dog of all theology. And so for Ismailis, that's Aga Khan, who I showed a picture of. It's his birthday. But if you're in Iran, their imam is basically hiding, and they have people who speak on behalf of the imam, which is another whole story I could get into if you really wanted me to. Come back to that one. I have trouble with cursive, so come back to that one. I'm thinking of the Catholic faith where there is a prohibition on birth control, but everyone does it and still considers themselves Catholic. Do Muslims have the same dynamic? Absolutely, right? So an example I have with students all the time is Catholics on Lent, Fridays, abstaining from meat on Fridays during Lent. My wife is Protestant. She doesn't care about meat, avoiding meat on Fridays and Lent. And so I often just forget and I end up eating meat. Like, am I no longer Catholic now? Like, oops, I noticed the next day, oh, I ate meat the other day. It's the same thing all the time for Muslims too. I have Muslims I know that drink alcohol, that drink beer at conferences, will drink wine, their families brew wine. For centuries, the families brewed wine in the Middle East. So it's very much here are the ideals, but humans are imperfect when they implement them. Yeah, there's a lot of leeway. Birth control is a huge debate within Muslim communities as well. There's lots of different opinions about that. People ask for the link. Muslims required to respect the people of the book. Yeah, so there's a term in the Quran, Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book, which is usually used to refer to Jews and Christians. The idea here is that Jews and Christians have real divine scripture. Like they believe the truth, right? They believe in the one true God. They worship the one God, and they have legit divine revelations. But Christians and Jews have tampered or corrupted that revelation over time. This idea that the Bible has been corrupted somehow by human hands, and so the ideal is to see Christians and Jews as protected communities. Okay, they're fellow believers. We have to protect them. They're allowed the freedom of religion, but also to encourage them that the Quran is the one true, like the truest form of their scripture in a sense. That Muhammad came to correct the mistakes that Christians made since the time between Jesus and Muhammad. But there is the idea that there is meant to be a lot of freedom of religion there. One of my best friends in grad school is from Cairo. He's an Egyptian Christian. He has lots of stories about how this is both how Egypt in particular fails in this regard, but also does well too. He's got stories about being a minority where he has lots of Muslim friends who obviously treat him well, and they can talk about anything they want to talk about. A lot of freedom there. But he also has stories about persecutions, maybe a strong word there, but being singled out for his beliefs as well. So it's very imperfect on the ground. Especially worse in countries like Christians are not allowed to have a church in the Arabian Peninsula. Actually, no Christians are allowed to enter into, Christians or Jews or non-Muslims are allowed to enter Mecca or Medina. I had a friend who once offered to smuggle me into Mecca, but it's still scary to me. But actually, if you follow the news, I think just last week, the first Catholic church is opening in one of the Gulf countries. So there's now going to be a Catholic church in the Arabian Peninsula. So even that is changing over time too. During your study of an interaction with Islam, what is something that's impacted your own faith practice? That's a really good question. One easy one there is prayer. Praying 5 times a day to me is very impressive. I mean, there are days I don't pray at all. And so to aspire to have a more regimented schedule is always been very attractive and appealing to me. I do find the Quran beautiful, not all of it. There are parts, especially the stuff that comes from Muhammad was in Mecca. There's a lot of, the Arabic is beautiful. I mean, the rhyme, it is a really neat, it just seems holy at times in the language. I'm also a language nerd, so I enjoy reading in that respect as well. I think the prayer, fasting, I mean, Lent is the easiest fast. It's don't eat on Fridays unless you forget. And then you give up something that is usually fairly easy. But Ramadan to me is I've only done one or two times I've tried doing the full day, and it's impressive. So that's something that's inspired me there too. I'll be thinking of a better example if I ever thought harder. All right. In the Green Bay area, are Muslims allowed to take prayer breaks? I think it depends on where you are. I have one friend, Muslim in Green Bay, Saeed, who does allow for. He's told me that he's also respected for his prayer times. Anyone know what's the largest Muslim population we have in Green Bay? I'm sure you know this. Somali. Yep. So he's Somali. But I lived in Milwaukee for a long time, and Milwaukee it was all Palestinians and Jordanians. But as far as I'm aware, from what I've heard from, I actually had my students volunteer with the Somali population. They had to tutor them in English and help them with classwork for this whole last semester. But from what I hear, the Somalis really enjoyed here, except for the cold. They don't like the cold. All right, what's the difference between the Muslims of secular Turkey and maybe Arabian Peninsula? Yeah, the Arabian Peninsula. So it's an interesting question because Turkey is historically been much more secular than Arabia, especially Saudi Arabia, but that's changing. The picture I had of Turkey, Turkish Muslims on the slide, it was President Erdogan. I don't know if anybody knows much about him, but I don't like him at all. He's not a very nice fellow. Actually, one of my best friends from high school and college, studying abroad in college, met a Turkish girl, very secular Turkish girl. They got married. Her dad's a secular politician in Turkey. When Erdogan did this whole coup thing a few years ago, her dad lost his job. He had to go into hiding, and he's now living in Turkey. He's in the Air Force here, working on a U.S. base in Turkey. But Erdogan is basically trying to change Turkey and make it more like Arabia. Like he's really implementing more Islamic law and less freedom for many parts of the country. But if you get a chance to go to Turkey, it's beautiful. Istanbul is like one of the coolest cities in the entire world. It's like a mixture of Middle East and Europe all at once. It's fantastic. I just saw a random thing, and then I'll wrap it up. But I meant to bring up the story earlier. When it comes to like defining Islam, this is my last plea when you think what Islam is. I remember in grad school, I was in small town Indiana at my favorite coffee shop in Goshen, Indiana. In Goshen, Indiana. It's awesome. But I was working on my dissertation, so I had a bunch of Arabic books open in front of me, reading through them. And somebody came by and said, "Oh, what are you reading?" I said, "Oh, just some Arabic." And he's, "So you study Islam?" "Yeah, it's in my area in school." And he goes, "So tell me, do you really think a religion that allows beheading people is a piece of religion?" I was like, "Well, when did you hear that Islam allows for beheadings?" And he's like, "Oh, I saw a video on YouTube once." And I was like, "Oh, like here I am with books written by Muslims in Arabic right in front of me, and his authority is YouTube." So my only plea is like, think about where the information is coming from, and especially if it's YouTube, probably not a very good authority. So when you filter the information with Islam, where is it coming from and why? I always tell students that if they make one Muslim friend, it'll change their, like, once you have a human face, a human friend to give a face to religion, your perception is going to change. And that's not just Islam as well, Hinduism, Buddhism, anything. Once you realize that these are human beings with complexities, your views are going to change. So, okay. All right.
Well, thank you, Dr. O'Connor. I want to say I've listened now to a presentation on the Jewish faith tradition, on the Society of Friends or the Quakers, on Buddhism, and now on Islam. And the thing that strikes me is how similar all of these are. When you look at the core values, they are so much alike. I think we have much more in common than we have in difference. There is coffee and some refreshments for you in Miller Hall if you would like to spend a little time in conversation. Next month, we will begin a series of panel discussions, and these will include Dr. O'Connor, Rabbi Shana Bacharach, Mary Kloss, Jody Figgins, and Father Tyler Richards, who's going to be on the panel representing, I would say, the mainline Christian faith tradition, but some people don't think the Episcopal Church is mainline, so. But he will be there too. So that begins next month, the second Tuesday at 6:30 here at St. Anne's. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
No, let's get it done. I'm great.